So I say we have a motion, let's vote on the motion. Unless, Ben, do you want to respond to that?
Well, the theory back then was, strategically, the committee was very concerned about spending money on this threat of lawsuit, because in the community there were threats of lawsuit. So what we did is we took a very conservative approach. It was relative to the deficit because you recognize the deficit at the time. And actually, that would have been the perfect way to remedy the problem that year, because what we requested town council to do was allow us to use, and we wanted them to join us, that carry forward surplus as a line of credit, because there was an issue of whether or not there was really a deficit, if you recall. So the theory was to let us use that as a line of credit. We would pay it back if there was a surplus at the end of the year. But for a bunch of political reasons, there was no movement on that concept, which would have resolved the whole issue that year. And the machinations that everybody went through could have been avoided, but they weren't. We also wanted to avoid a lawsuit, so we wanted to be buttressed in that decision by a letter from Mr. Abbott. And if you read his decision is a lot more expansive than my question. So he goes well beyond my question, and he says what the status of the law is. So the reason why that's significant is because his office, by statute, is given the authority, their responsibility to interpret all Title 16 statutes and anything that's related to education, and that's what he did in that letter. So short of a court opinion, specific opinion on the point, which there isn't one specifically on the point, his opinion now rules, and it's expansive enough to carry the opinion that I've given you. So we can ask him another specific question. I think his answer will be exactly the same. I look at his analysis and I agree with it. I agree with all the underpinnings. The chair has pointed out some cases that are pretty close on point that will probably direct the court into the exact same direction. So that's probably the best explanation I can give you. I've given it to you once before. It didn't satisfy you, Mike, but that's the best I can do.
Can we vote? Should we vote on the letter now? Okay, we have a motion on the letter and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. And can I just maybe the best of you guys just put a draft letter together, and then
I can send it to the committee, but it would take another month to approve the question.
any thought?
And then if you want me to do that.
How do we? No, just
Whatever you think.
how many requests did you want to? Maybe you
Just
could.
the one I asked for.
Do you want to
email
give me that
question?
to Sherry and we'll get it to Ben, or?
Sherry, do you have the question the motion that I made?
I do.
I have the question. I wrote it down. I think I got it.
Okay.
No, Bill
And I'll
just asked
send
me
it
to
to
send
you.
it to you, but that's my only question.
Yeah, but I think I have what you wanted down. I can send it to you and you can review it if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah, no, I misunderstood. I thought you said there were other things you wanted to ask.
No, I don't want to ask.
Okay, okay. Mike, you want that?
I just want to make sure that when you ask that question, the charter references are addressed as well.
The charter is not relevant because the state law is what overrides the charter.
But the
Because
state,
let me finish. Those state statutes under Title 16 are specific. So what the court does is it will enforce those over a general reference in the charter, and they've done that many times. So it's not relevant. He'll look at it and say, well, what the hell is this? Why is this even in here? So he's going to look at the educational statutes, and that's going to tell you how a school committee, in your general school committee, how a school committee could use that surplus.
but the educational statutes, Ben, do refer to charter requirements, and that you will abide by the charters and ordinances of your town.
Not with respect to the spending of the surplus.
With
Okay, Mike,
respect
I
to
don't-
budget.
We're gonna get a
Bill,
little.
well then, why don't you stay home? Because every time I open your mouth, you're trying to shut me
Open your
down.
mouth?
Every time I've opened my mouth, you're gaveling me before I even ask
I'm
a
not
question.
counting, but we voted on it. We don't want with Preston, you've got.
Okay, I won't, I guess I'm not allowed
I'm
to ask
happy to,
questions.
I'm happy to work with Mrs. Nato on the letter.
Yes.
I'll send it to her satisfaction. Okay?
Thank, I think that's great. It's Ms. Nato's motion. Mike, you're on the number two. You two.
Well, I'll table that, I'll make a motion to table number 2 at this time. I'll also table number 3 at this time as well. I noticed the superintendent did put a request in that we not address that issue until Ms. Marcotte is present. So there's no point in me speaking to either of those at this point in time.
I appreciate that, and thank you, Mike. There's a little point, Sherry, is it take no action table? Because I know it's a sticky point, but when you table, you kind of need a,
If you table, then at the next meeting, you have to take it off.
you have to
Then you have to
take
take
it
it
off.
off.
So it's just take no action,
Take no action.
take no
Take
action.
no action, then you don't have.
Okay, but it'll automatically be on
Oh,
next
yes.
month's agenda,
Yes.
the next agenda, those two things, okay.
When you table, it just goes through, it might not end up back on the table.
Mr. Chairman, I think the appropriate motion would be motion to continue it to the next meeting.
Usually we, fine, I'll make a motion, Mike, is there anything else on 25 you want to?
I'll make the motion to table, what did you say, I'm sorry?
Continue?
To continue or take no action.
Continue or table actions until the next meeting for items 2 and 3 on the agenda.
Second, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, ayes have it. D4.
Well, I think when we had the group meeting with the budget committee and the school committee and the town council, we discussed the fund balance policies. And I think it's been alluded to earlier that, you know, maybe we can come to some terms with, that all the parties can live with, of how the fund balance will be used, when it will be used, and what the protocol will be, you know, to be followed is. I noted at that joint meeting, which unfortunately, I know Phil wasn't there, I forget who else might not have been there, that
I was not.
that most of the districts don't just simply tap their fund balance, they put it in their budget submission for the ensuing school year as a reappropriation of their fund balance. And when they submit the budget document to the municipality, they'll put, for example, if they need $20,050,000, they'll put 20 million from the local, and then they'll show $50,000 as a reappropriation of the carry forward fund balance. And to me, that's the way that they should be doing it, because they're in compliance with the charter. The new appropriation, they won't be exceeding, because that reappropriation is included in the total dollar amount that the town approves. And in my mind, that's a legitimate way of doing it. All of the expenditures that are going to be supported by that $50,000 of reappropriated money will be included in the budget, that will be reviewed by the town council or the city council, and the budget committee and the planning board will review the capital that it's going to support. So, you know, I think if we could come up with a policy that everybody could live with as to how we will use the fund balance, it can avoid a lot of issues. I mean, at some point, it's going to come to either litigation or charter amendments. So if we could live peacefully with one another and try to draw up some type of policy
That's a great policy in a perfect world, but if tonight the roof collapses in this building, we need to use some of that money. You've just locked your hands, and now you can't tap that fund, so I don't know how you fix the roof. So I like to leave a little flexibility.
well, you could use.
You want it to be everything budgeted, time, perfect. Life doesn't happen perfect. My refrigerator breaks tomorrow, I don't have a budget, I have to buy another one. It's the same thing here, so you need to leave yourself some flexibility, Mike. You want a perfect policy for spending, it just doesn't exist.
Well, I don't think that's the issue here, because if the roof started leaking tomorrow and you had to repair it, you have this year's budget to.
But let's say the whole roof and I need $500,000. I don't have $500,000 in the budget, so I have to go to this surplus and use that, and that gives us the ability to do that. If you don't, then you have to go back to the town council, you have to wait 6 months. I gotta fix the roof today. I like flexibility, I just don't like strict policy.
I think there are other districts, and I don't know if Ben is aware of it or not, but there are other districts who do the budget year.
Yeah, they got no
And
flexibility.
reappropriate. No, they go back and they.
Yeah, they've done it,
if the
and I've read
situation
what
comes up-
you've written, and I don't like what they reappropriate for, because they reappropriate for things that are continuing every year. Okay, they're using their appropriation and appropriating.
Ms. Gillette, you want to get,
If I could just ask a question, I believe Mr. Scungio.
Getting your money's worth.
About time. I'm kidding. If we were to go the route that we were to put a request in, as Mr. Clifford is suggesting, does that include, or would that be part of the cap going forward? For example, you're only allowed to have a certain amount, a percentage of an increase. So if we have a fund balance left over this year, and we know next year we want to spend $250,000 on something, if we were to ask it to be in next year's budget, does that go towards that cap?
Yeah, I think there are two problems. I mean, the first one that you pointed to is very insightful because it would have an impact on the gross amount of money that you can get. Because there's a cap on how much you could have asked for.
Right.
The other issue is, and I don't think that numbers people get this kind of issue. And so what maintenance effect, this is more directed towards Mike on the budget board, and it's not, I don't mean it disrespectfully, but what maintenance of effort is, everybody looks at it as a floor from the municipal side and the money side. It's the minimum amount of money that we can give, but that's not really what the statute says or means. What it says is that establishes a floor, but what your responsibility to do here on the municipal side is to measure what the actual educational need of the district is, right? So your responsibility isn't necessarily that floor. If the need is greater than that floor, the responsibility is to fund that need. So overlay that with a request to reappropriate an extra $500,000, okay? So you ask the town council to use the $500,000 and you're gonna use it for general operating budget, because that's what you're applying it to. What have they now done and what have you done? You've established an additional need in your general operating budget for another $500,000. So what those clever school departments do is they specifically ask that money to be reappropriated because then they have an argument that maintenance of effort has increased based on the need. So if they go to court and there hasn't been a bona fide reduction in general operating expenses in a Carullo case, that bolsters that case significantly. So I'm not so sure the town council would or should want to do that. They're a pretty savvy group of guys.
Now, some of the
And they're gonna look at the money. I don't think it's gonna work. And I don't think you should do it for both of those reasons.
Some of the municipal business managers, finance directors that I spoke to, Ben, kind of had the opposite opinion. Because if it's a reappropriation of fund balances, they believe it's not attributed to.
Because those are the numbers, guys. They're not the need, guys. That's why I prefaced that, and that's where you.
Well, has there ever been a ruling that was common towards the maintenance of effort?
Every single Carullo case that's been decided by any of the courts is based on need. They say, what is the educational basic need of the district? That's what has to be funded. So what you guys look at on the money side is what's the minimum amount in terms of finances is my exposure, which is a fine analysis. But if you start to add money on top of that, you establish that need. It's great for the school committee. I think you should do it because we'll have an argument later on that we can get more money from the town council if we need to, because we've established the educational need in the district. I don't know if you would go down that road. I think it's great, do it.
I don't think anybody's advocating using the reappropriated fund balance to support the operating budget. I think that you use it for one-time expenses or capital improvements.
Well, that would be the wise way to spend your surplus.
That's a wise way, but that's what the other towns do.
Right, I thought that's what you were suggesting, to be part of the appropriation. So I thought you were
But some of
suggesting.
them do use it for a specific purpose of the capital, not just the
Yeah,
operating.
but most of them you pointed to.
And some of them kind of.
The smart districts understand, as John's going to point out, you can't build a structural deficit.
Yeah,
Right.
Mr. Ladd,
that's the other.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch up.
Okay.
Mr. Ladd, I had a question over here.
Well, I just want to go back to my original question. So therefore, let's say we added, or we proposed to add $500,000. In essence, we'd actually be cutting that from our services the following year, because if we're, I don't know if I'm going to word this correctly, but if we're requesting to add $500,000 or whatever from our fund balance, that's $500,000 above and beyond what they've given us, but it's for specific things, which means what that money was originally for in the original budget before it was added, we now need to find that somewhere else because they can't increase over a certain allotment.
It gets recharged every
They
year.
recharge every year.
So it doesn't do that. But the point that John was making is that if you don't have the revenue flow to fund that, you create a deficit the following year, and then the town has to find the money somewhere, and then have to take it out of their side of the budget to fill that gap.
All right, so
Plus
I
your
thought that came
additional
out.
need that you develop year to year.
Right.
So that's why they made the comment, and Mike is correct too. You get that money and you apply it to capital improvements or one-time purchases, technology purchase. Usually technology purchases now, because everybody is going towards a digital curriculum, a digital district. that's probably the wisest use. And you see districts like North Kingstown and South Kingstown, that's what they did last year and this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we go on to number E5, the request for funding from the school committee, school department fund balance.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this item. I think that at the October meeting, we voted that we would withhold any votes on spending the money until Mrs. Marcotte was able to provide us with reconciled budget figures. And I believe at the October meeting, she said she would do her best to get them to us in November, but that she was preparing for the audit, so it might not be until December. So since we voted that way, and since we still don't have reconciled budget, I'd like to table this item until the December meeting. That's my motion, table till the December meeting.
Is there a second? Second. Okay. The motion to table till the December, you said the December meeting, right?
Well, that's when she thought was the latest that we had to reconcile budget figures, I believe.
I think so.
We should be, our audit is done, basically. We are waiting for the report. At this point, she's working at the town, finishing up, tying up, so we should be looking good in December.
I think that's what she said.
Yeah, that's right on
She said she was
target.
gonna try for November.
Yep, we did try, and she wasn't ready. She's finishing up her report right now, so.
I did talk to her before that she said, she was working on, a couple of weeks ago I talked to her, she said she was working on it and trying,
Right, well, since
actually,
we moved it in October, I just would like to put it back up, put it on the agenda for December.
sure. I think the school's pretty much done, there's more on the town side there that's holding them up from what or the town is what they're working on still. Mr. Superintendent, you had a comment?
I just want to make sure I understood, Mr. Nato. So this is number 5, this is the request for funding,
D5.
D5, from the school department fund balance, school committee fund balance, around the plan that was requested that we submit and prioritize. So you want to take no action at this time on that tonight, is that what I understand?
That's the motion to take, the motion to continue it.
To continue
To
it.
continue it to December.
Oh, continue. Okay.
Mr. Superintendent, is there anything on the list that's, I'd say, a burning need or something that, is time sensitive or something that,
There is, I don't know, yeah, there is, I don't know, and I respect.
One item.
We already made
Yeah.
a motion in October, though, that we weren't gonna consider it until.
No, I understand, I'm just asking if there's any need, I
Yeah.
just wanna know if he's got a.
Technology. I mean, we don't know how else to put that forward, I think, when you get around to it, I mean, when you get the reports you need, we really hope that you will consider, it's number 3 on our list because number 1 was something requested by Mrs. Nato for consideration. Number 2, honestly, is just, we run such a lean facilities budget that when
I get it.
and so technology, John, is.
Yes, I just wanna know
That's
what
a
your
big
number one.
And I don't anticipate the town council funding number 4, even though they approved it. I think Ben's right. I think be leery of funding that because it would, the recent Cumberland decision, it would affect their maintenance of efforts. So that's it. But thank you very much for asking. I appreciate it.
Okay. So we have a motion to table, a motion to continue.
Continue to December.
Senator's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, next up.
Bill, we kind of jumped off before the policy for use of fund balance before I didn't realize we were wrapping up and moving it on.
We talked
Are
quite a
we
bit.
going to investigate drawing up a policy, or Ben, do you see any point in doing that, or no?
But he wants to, he can.
Well, might as well, we should might as well wait until the letter, we get the letter back at least, so before we do a policy.
Yeah, you
might
gotta
as well get the letter back first before we do it. Don't want to make a policy and then the letter come back and say something else.
That's committed.
Okay. Next up, community rental account.
Well,
Mike, you're up.
yep.
Rental revenue.
Here, capacity, so.
Mike, not to complain, but if we can get these ahead of time, it would help.
It's good. Is this in the packet, Mr. Chair?
No.
Is this in the packet?
No. I decided to, yeah, I do. When I was, it's not any big thing, it's the budget page. Because I thought if I gave you a visual, you might be able to understand what I'm talking about. But in the earlier, at another meeting, you voted to provide funding for the lacrosse team and I think what was the other?
Track.
Track team.
With the committed rental account from this year. And I don't understand how you're able to do that, because for the committed rental account for this year, if you look at the adopted budget, the $60,000 of rental income is listed as a rental source.